Welcome to the Animal Liberation Hour, where we seek insight from animal rights and liberation activists around the world so that we can think, reflect, learn, and be inspired. I'm Michele Granberg, and for this episode, I sat down with Leah Garcés and discussed the Transfarmation Project and her new book by the same name. I can't wait for you to hear what Leah had to say. Before we get into the episode, I want to remind you that Animal Liberation Hour is a project of Animal Activism Mentorship. AAM is a free multinational program that helps aspiring animal rights activists, as well as those who are already activists but want to take their activism to the next level. From one-on-one mentorship to free workshops and trainings to this podcast, AAM seeks to empower humans to fight for animals so that the world will have more activists and we can achieve animal liberation sooner. For more information, visit animalactivismmentorship.com and follow AAM on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube at Animal Activism Mentorship. You can keep up with the Animal Liberation Hour on AAM social media too. So now, our guest, Leah Garcés, is the CEO and president of Mercy for Animals and author of Grilled, Turning Adversaries into Allies to Change the Chicken Industry, and Transfarmation, the Movement to Free Us from Factory Farming. With more than 20 years of leadership experience in the animal protection movement, she has partners with corporations, communities, and governments on her mission to build a better food system. Her work has been featured in national and international media outlets, including the New York Times, the Washington Post, BuzzFeed, and the Chicago Tribune. She has presented at global forums, including TEDx and the World Health Organization's Global Forum for Health Research. I hope you are as inspired by Leah as I am. Enjoy. So, Leah, welcome to the Animal Liberation Hour, and I'm truly thrilled to have you here.
I'm so happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
So let's explore your newly released book, Transfarmation, the movement to free us from factory farming, as well as the project itself. And there's a lot there, of course. So as part of building a farmer-led movement for a better food system, the Transfarmation Project funds and guides U.S. farmers motivated by economic, environmental, or animal welfare concerns in switching from raising animals to growing specialty crops, in a nutshell. So tell us what the public needs to know about the current state of factory farming and how Transfarmation offers a new solution or a better avenue, and we'll dive into it further as we go.
Yeah, thank you for that great question. I think if you are listening to this podcast, you probably already know that factory farming is bad news. It's really bad. And maybe you already make thoughtful choices about the way you eat and the way you live in the world. And you've accepted factory farming as one of those critical systems that we need to end because it's so harmful. Uh, We know that factory farming, the way we produce meat, dairy, and eggs, is a moral atrocity in the way that it treats animals, workers, and farmers. It trashes our environment and ecosystems. We won't reach our climate change targets if we don't drastically reduce consumption of animal products. It treats animals horrifically cruelly. And of course, it is not so great for humans either, whether you're living near a farm or you're working in one or working in a slaughterhouse. So all of that data is really, really clear in terms of the need to end factory farming. And we created this project so that farmers have a way out because so often we assume that farmers want to be doing this work. We have assumptions about who they are. But really, when I took a closer look, it turns out that farmers feel trapped. They're trapped by debt and struggle. And when given the option, they want to get out. And so this project And part of the book covers helping farmers transition, stories of farmers transitioning out of that cycle of debt and struggle and toward a new way, specialty crops and retrofitting their warehouses so that they can grow crops in a sustainable and compassionate way.
Yeah, it's so pioneering in so many ways, and I'm glad you're emphasizing. And can you say a little bit more about why it's important to emphasize that the Transformation Project is farmer led?
Yes, I think what's really powerful is farmers want this. They're looking for solutions. Right now, the way the majority of farmers are growing food for the United States is in the meat and dairy and egg industry. And when they do that, they're usually under contract, which means that they are under tremendous debt. And that debt keeps them trapped in a cycle of growing animals, of keeping animals in these horrific conditions. And they want a way out. And so what we're doing is following their lead. We're just providing resources, we're providing consultation, we're providing some financial support and giving them the way out, helping them find the way out. It's led by them. The solutions are created by them, and we are simply facilitating that transition.
Yeah, so we get an even better sense of that. Would you share, I guess, a brief version of a farmer's story, a success story? I know you have many and they're outlined and detailed in the book, but of an example of how this works.
Of course, yeah. I think the Haleys are a great family to talk about. And they really epitomize the plight of American chicken farmers. So for 3 decades, they really toiled on their Texas farm, supplying chicken to Pilgrim's Pride, which is one of the biggest poultry companies. And what began as this very promising business for the family soon revealed it was not promising at all. And the farmers found themselves caught in a cycle of debt and struggle. And what happened was the father of the family, the patriarch of the family passed away. His widow had to take on managing the farm, working 2 jobs to make ends meet. And in 2007, after years of sacrifice, they finally had paid off their debts, only to face a very cruel ultimatum from the company, which was invest in upgrades or lose their contract. Now, this is a pattern that is very familiar in the poultry industry. So just as farmers reach financial freedom, the goalpost shifts. And after a decade or two, the standards change, the technology change, and these mega corporations demand the farmers pay for the upgrades or they will lose everything. So the farmers in this case took the loan on, which added up to another $1 million that they had to take out. Over a decade later, still $130,000 in debt, the company demanded they upgrade again. And this time the Haley said, "No way, we're not doing it." And they reached out to us at the Transformation Project, and we started working with them to transition from being an indebted poultry farmer to an independent hemp grower. And in this poetic twist, they not only switched to hemp, but they repurposed some of their old chicken warehouses to be a sanctuary for rescued dogs and donkeys. It was just a beautiful transition, and I actually was there when we were harvesting the first crop of hemp together, and it was so beautiful to see the family really go from having such a big change of heart, having the family come back together on the land, where they went from killing something to growing something. It's so wonderful to see this transition and see their financial freedom and see the family come together in this way.
Wow, that is so beautiful. And how full circle, I mean, you've done such an amazing job with this work and putting it all in the book that as an activist, I never imagined I could feel empathy for a farmer. And I know you felt the same in the beginning. And I took that journey with you and now have empathy for these farmers. And we need more empathy, So really, really beautiful. And, kind of on that, you talk a lot about creating allies as the path instead of creating enemies or doubling down on our differences. And that's one of your main messages, I know. So talk a little bit about how you discovered common ground with farmers and companies, and your strategy for making adversaries become allies, and emphasize again how engagement does not mean endorsement.
That is definitely one of my key messages. Engagement doesn't mean endorsement. And this happened for me. For decades, I think, probably a decade and a half, I viewed chicken factory farmers as my enemy until I actually met one. And I had the opportunity through a journalist to meet Craig Watts, who is in North Carolina. He invited me to his house to view his chicken barns, and I didn't know what to expect. I really wanted to just go in, get footage, get out, and expose it. But when I got there, I changed my mind. I sat with him, I listened to his story, I listened to the debt and struggle of his family. He has twins that are the same age as my oldest kid, and we realized there were all these points of connection that we had overlooked, and there were more points of connection than not. And through that friendship, I realized that I had overlooked an ally. I had overlooked someone who also hates this system, who also feels oppressed, who also wants to change the food and farming system. And frankly, Americans trust farmers. And this was a voice missing from the conversation, missing from the advocacy that we were doing. And so it was a wake-up call, and it changed my strategy for advocating. It made me realize how many other overlooked allies are out there. And I began looking at the world with new eyes, looking for others that I previously thought were enemies, and became
Mm.
curious. And I think that's important. We should become curious. And it doesn't mean you have to endorse what the people are doing, but being curious, being open, and being engaged with them is a first step till toward discovering uh, untapped power and untapped allies.
Yeah, I love how you really frame this in that there's a way. If we sit down, if we talk, if we meet each other face to face, there is some win win win, right? In any situation. And as you often say, what can you do, right? Focus on what you can do. And so, we're saying that this is not in any way harming farmers. This is benefiting, right? So, how does transforming factory farming specifically benefit farmers a little further, as well as slaughterhouse workers and others who are working adjacent to big animal ag, and basically all of us in the bigger picture long term?
Yeah, I think, as I mentioned at the beginning, at the top of the podcast, factory farming oppresses pretty much everyone except a few shareholders and the executives in a corporation. So it oppresses those who are working in the slaughterhouses. It oppresses those who are living near factory farms and have to suffer from air pollution and water pollution, and they have no power in changing that. And then the farmers, and of course, the animals that are trapped in the system. And it's also ruining our ecosystems, it's creating pollution, and we won't reach our climate change targets unless we cut the amount of industrial animal products that we are consuming and producing in the world. So, when I look at this problem, this complex problem, I also see that we can have so much bang for our buck. We can have so many of the world's greatest problems solved with one simple solution. Just stop factory farming.
Mm.
Stop consuming so many animal products. This is the thread that's tied to everything. And when we address it, we will address so much suffering in the world, which is why I focused my career on ending factory farming.
Yeah. So just to summarize that, this is a system of oppression that really serves no one. We have everything to gain and really nothing to lose. Talk a little bit more about some of the innovative approaches to social impact that you discuss in detail in the book, like improving labor standards for workers and farmers, improving animal welfare standards, and calling for reform across the board.
Yeah, my final chapter brings together the three sections of the book. So the three sections of the book look at how factory farming is affecting those closest to it. So farmers, animals, and then communities, slaughterhouse workers, refugees, people living around factory farms. And then the final section really ties together with here are solutions. Now, one of the things that might surprise people is is how horrific slaughterhouses are, in particular for immigrant women. And the book goes into quite a lot of detail about that. And one of the workers that I met with, she told me that up to 10,700 pigs would pass through her hands each day. And she told me about having to hold her bladder for hours and witnessing people urinate on the floor in desperation, and a 10-hour shift only having two 15-minute breaks and one unpaid lunch break, 30 minutes, which must include taking off and putting back on her protective equipment. And she really emphasized that the key problem for her, the root problem for the workers, is that the line goes too fast, creating dangerous working conditions for these women. Slowing down the slaughterhouse speed is a key solution. It not only makes the circumstances safer for workers, but also will reduce the chance of animals being treated cruelly. And thirdly, it creates a less efficient system, which will mean the cost of the animal products will go up, as it should, because right now all those costs are being externalized to harm to workers, harm to animals. And that is at meaning we get cheap meat, but someone else is paying the price, the workers and the animals. And so by one of the solutions needs to be this slowing down of the lines. They go too fast, they create dangerous working circumstances and cruel circumstances for animals. So that's one of the solutions that I look at
Mm.
in the book.
Yeah, and it's hard to believe that anybody wouldn't hear that and just know that that's not okay, and just shake their heads in wonderment that that is still continuing in 2024. So, absolutely, there needs to be reform, big changes to happen. But so now we are feeling that empathy for the people in the industry and how stuck they are. But let's refocus to the animals now as the victims. Let's bring the animals front and center. This is the stuff that's hard to hear, of course, but needs to be heard. Talk about the life that chickens specifically endure inside factory farms and give us an image because not everybody has seen the footage, although I have, and many of us have. What stands out for you about chickens in factory farms? Because you often say that it's your core belief that if people saw with their own eyes what happens behind closed doors, that they would not be okay with it and not want to keep participating. And then on a personal level, if you want to answer, does it haunt you and wake you up at night?
Yes, this is the reason I get out of bed in the morning. Chickens. I love chickens. They are beautiful, in deep emotionally attached animals to humans. They are wonderful. They're like floppy cats, and they're not given the life that they deserve, unfortunately, in this world. 90% of all factory farmed animals are chickens who are raised for meat. What does that look like? It's very hard to imagine. So you have to go from the 9 billion down into the one individual's life and what he or she would experience. And I've been to many of these farms. And the first thing that happens when you walk into one of these, they're long metal warehouses. You would never suspect that inside of these long metal warehouses are tens of thousands of stuffed chickens, or they're stuffed wall to wall. And you open the door, and the first thing that happens is you are hit with a wall of ammonia and dust, and you can't breathe, and you're coughing, and your eyes burn. And when you finally kind of get your senses back, you look around and there is a sea of white. There are chickens stuffed wall to wall. And when you get a closer look and you look at these chickens, you see that they can't walk very well. Many of them have their legs splayed to the front, to the back, to the side. They can stand up for a moment and waddle forward and then flop down. This is because they have pressurized genetics that have made them grow so big, so fast that they literally collapse under the weight of their own chests. And that's the part of the animal that we like to eat in America, the breast meat. So the industry has forced the genetics to grow huge breasts and small legs. And as a result, they're sort of like a grape on toothpicks. And this causes immense pain for them and suffering during their short 6 weeks. And because they're sitting so much, They are sitting on litter. Now, we think of litter and that sounds like a nice word, but it's not. It's actually the feces of tens of thousands of birds over multiple flocks. They don't change the species between flocks. They don't change this litter. And as a result, it's composting and hot. I've actually stuck a thermometer in there, and it's between 85 and 90 degrees, and it's composting. So they're sitting and they're shifting and they're rubbing and they get bed sores basically on their chests and they get hock burns, so burns on the bottom of their feet. And when you pick them up, you see this red raw chest, which I've done many times just to give them a break from being on the litter. And I visited many of these farms, and when I go, I there's tens of thousands of animals. I couldn't possibly rescue all of them. It's impossible, and that's what haunts me. That's just one farm, one warehouse, and a farm will have 4 and sometimes 50 warehouses, up to 50 warehouses in North Carolina. And it haunts me that individuals like my companion animal, Henrietta, who I rescued from a factory farm, there are 9 billion of them every single year living this horrific life of suffering. That's what our meat that ends up on our plate is coming from. That's where it's coming from this on the backs of these animals, on the backs of their intense suffering.
It's really heartbreaking. Um, so share a little bit more about Henrietta, um, because I think it's so important, as you know, to put a name and a face to the plight of these very real, very sentient individuals. And Henrietta's story, you got to know her. She was family. And when I read her story in your book, I cried and I felt her pain and I felt your loss. And it makes us think of and grieve for every animal as an individual and the trillions who've been killed or died in factory farming over time, right now in this moment as well. And it remind people that every individual has a story. And then the other side of that is sort of I also volunteer at farm animal sanctuaries. And there are wonderfully more and more sanctuaries all the time. And these are places that are happy endings for farm animals, for the lucky ones. And I fall in love with every individual that I get to know within a minute in the sanctuaries, and I know them by name, and that's what people are missing. That's the disconnect. I get excited to see them and I can't wait to see them. They are friends and I get attached very quickly and I wish everybody could get to know them. So talk a little bit how Henrietta continues to enrich in her memory your life and what a difference that makes.
Yes, I think you pull on something really important. Humans as a species are capable of moral choices. Unfortunately, overall, we've chosen to be cruel to farmed animals, but we have a choice. And I wanted to find new ways to tell stories of how this system impacts farmed animals in a positive way. So I went to sanctuaries and I even rescued an animal myself from a factory farm, and that is Henrietta. And Henrietta was from a farm in Texas, and it was during COVID, and the slaughterhouses had backed up because the slaughterhouse workers were sick and dying from COVID, and the birds did not get picked up on time, and many were left dead or dying. And the farmer called me up and said, "If you wanna take some, I won't say anything." And I looked around and I tried to find the ones that I thought could survive. There were 20 or so in this warehouse. I picked up 3, I put them in my car, I drove all the way back 15 hours in my car, got home at 2 in the morning. My kids were very excited. They woke me up at 6 in the morning going, "Where are the chickens?" And we bathed them. We tried to recover their strength. And unfortunately, 2 of them did not make it beyond the week, but Henrietta did. And she did because she happened to be a runt. She happened to be small. So those pressurized genetics I referred to meant that she had a better chance to survive. And something remarkable happened. She brought so much joy into our family, and this was during COVID, so most people think of this as the year of COVID, and for us, it was the year of Henrietta, and she especially bonded with my then 6-year-old kindergarten daughter, and their connection and their love for each other was like any companion animal and a child. They were inseparable. My daughter had the chickens sleep in her room. She taught her to ride the skateboard in the Roomba. She'd do virtual school with Henrietta and feed her snacks while they were learning math and reading. And she brought a lot of joy. And even for me, someone who had worked for 2 decades advocating for chickens, had was surprised at the depth of emotion and attachment and sweetness that Henrietta showed us. She would come running when we called her. She was quirky and funny and feisty. She'd fight our cat over, food scraps that fell on the floor. They'd have little tussles and, like typical siblings. And her being part of our family really brought home the missed lives these 9 billion animals have, or they're missing. None of them get to experience this, but all of them are capable of this kind of connection joy. And not only that, we as human beings are missing that relationship. She brought that joy. She brought that curiosity for the world into our home. So not only are they missing that, but we as human beings are missing out.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And maybe in a little bit we'll talk a bit about speciesism, which is sort of at the root of that, but I will echo what you're saying and I love chickens. I like people are really missing just these incredibly intelligent, funny individuals. They could be part of our lives. They could be incorporated into our lives and we can be living with them and we're missing that. So let's talk about pigs a little bit then. Another animal that is of course exploited to the nth degree and maligned and just gets the worst insulting and misunderstanding of who they are. You have a story in the book of Felix the pig, who's a pig that fortunately wound up got to still lives, I think, you let me know, in a sanctuary that I'm familiar with, Cis Sanctuary, and that's in the book. But what is it like for pigs in factory farms? And touch on gestation crates and farrowing crates, which is I know something activists are always working to get the laws changed and banned.
Yes, and I think the Felix story really helps illustrate what Felix escaped, and that's a good way for us to bring people into the conversation who may be not wanting to hear about factory farming. So the story of Felix is, Erica and Joseph lived in Jacksonville, North Carolina, and she was a volunteer firefighter, and he was a soon-to-retire Marine. And when Hurricane Florence struck North Carolina, they began checking on neighbors and the elderly, and they expected to be doing some work around displaced companion animals. But what they found instead is they were getting a lot of calls about pigs. Why? The storm had torn through factory farms. So North Carolina is one of the biggest producers of pork and bacon and all those products that come from pig factory farms. Now, tragically, sows, which are the female pigs, are trapped in these farrowing crates and they drowned during the floods and the hurricane, leaving mostly males roaming free. So they had escaped, but the females drowned and died. And Erica called these the Hurricane Boys. And there was an original 44 survivors. And this is how Sisu Refuge was created. And they bought some land in Duplin County, which is one of the biggest counties, most concentrated counties of industrial pig farms. And the sanctuary grew and grew beyond the hurricane survivors, from road accidents to escapees from transport trucks. And amongst these was a pig named Felix, and he was a truck jumper. So Felix had been torn from his mother and put on a transport truck where he would be going to what's called a nursery, which is a euphemism for a fattening farm. Now, Felix said no thanks, and he leapt from a truck in a frantic attempt to return to his mother. And this is where Erica and Joseph got the call. He arrived at 3 pounds, fresh from this escape, and he really embraced being part of this family. Now, what had he escaped? He had escaped the harsh realities of commercial pig farming. Now, his mother will have endured this cycle of confinement in gestation and farrowing crates. These are metal crates that confine pregnant females in a crate so small that she cannot turn around or lie down comfortably. They are denied their natural instinct, which is to nest and bond with their piglets. In nature, pregnant pigs would seek the perfect spot for their nest. And it's so beautiful to watch this. They gather grass and even flowers and ferns. They decorate their nests. And in contrast, industrial mothers, Felix's mother, have to give birth on a cold, slatted floor in a metal crate. This was the fate that Felix narrowly escaped. And separated from his mother, he really bonded with Erica and Joseph. They carried him in a carrier. They really embraced him almost like a baby into their home, and they enjoyed that bonding, that connection with him, and he enjoyed it too. He found a lot of love and comfort and safety in his human family. He would actually fall asleep in Erica and Joseph's arms, and he eventually moved out into the forest where he made a new family with other pigs. He made his own chosen family with 4 pigs, named Zeke, Stewie, Pierre, and Penelope, and they bonded, and now they live their days out in this forest, swimming and waddling in the mud together.
Nice. That's nice. We're so happy for him, and I know of many others where I am as well that I get to visit pigs thriving, and it's so fun to see them and hear their stories, and there's many escape stories. They know, animals know. They know when they need to get away. They know they're in danger, so there's all of that, and just like us, they wanna survive, they wanna live, they wanna protect their families. Has there been, because you bring up another blind spot in these factory farmers where they don't have plans for emergency, for weather or evacuation or emergencies. They Has there been any improvement that you know of in that where they're being told they have to have some kind of evacuation plan or nothing?
For the most part, it's insufficient for the number of animals that are kept on farms. And we still see, for example, with avian flu, we have outbreaks and
Mm.
animals are cruelly killed on farm. And if they're not cruelly killed on farm and a natural disaster hits, then these animals will die under these circumstances through flooding or the power goes out and the generator breaks and the animals suffocate from the heat. And our tax dollar, for the most part, pays for that when it happens. When a farmer loses all of that, it's not the company that pays for it, it's us, tax dollars. Our tax dollars are paying for that loss. And if the companies like Purdue or Tyson or Smithfield had to pay for that, you can bet they would fix it real quick. They would reduce the number of animals. They would have backup generators. They would find solutions. And so that's part of the solutions that need to be met. And again, internalizing that cost within the system rather than not making the companies pay for it. And as a result, having cheap meat, but then the cost is externalized to someone else. And in this case, I'm talking about our tax dollars are being used to clean up the mess.
Ah, I'm surprised and not surprised by that, and again, terrible. So let's talk about the book a bit more, and, like, sort of on a personal, professional level, you've said that this is your life's work. It's why you're here on the planet, and the path found you. So tell us about your why and an inspiration for writing Transformation. Again, for our audience, Transformation was recently released on September 17th. The book is an insightful and pointed exploration of the injustices perpetrated by factory farming, from animal cruelty and environmental degradation to the exploitation of farmers and marginalized rural communities. So, how does writing this book, in other words, putting it in all in a book format, reach more people and advance your work at Mercy for Animals?
Yes, I am the head of Mercy for Animals, the CEO and president, and I'm also the founder of the Transformation Project. So we are this impactful international activist organization working to end factory farming, and I've been doing this for nearly a quarter of a century. So why did I write this book? And the reason is the big reason is although the data is clear, all of the numbers are clear, the statistics are clear that factory farming is bad, we are losing the narrative battle. And I'll give you an example. So there was a recent poll conducted by Topo's Partnership that looked at Americans' perceptions of food, of the food system. And one of the most shocking parts of this poll was that it turns out the majority of Americans have a positive or strongly positive view of Tyson and Smithfield and these big mega meat corporations, these the largest pig and poultry companies in the United States. So the story that Americans believe is that these companies are benevolent. As the shoppers walk down the aisles and they see the company's logos on these plastic wrap meats and they think, nice, that's a nice company. I have good feelings about. They pick up the package, they put it in their cart, and they don't give it another thought. And if we were a data-driven world, if we were a logical world, we'd do the opposite. We would weigh up the benefits and drawbacks, and we would be very clear this is the wrong system for producing protein. It's just the companies are destructive, the system's harmful, it's inefficient, it's wasteful. In fact, it could end our species. But the world is not logical, and we are really driven by narratives and culture. And the stories we believe often drive our behavior. So I wrote this book because those stories need to change about and about meat, the way that meat, dairy, and egg is produced, and the companies behind them, if we're going to end this system. And I wrote this book not to give us more statistics or data, because there's a lot out there, but to give us these powerful, unforgettable stories that of these ways, these experiences that real individuals are having. And I went into the field to find the most powerful stories I could.
Mm.
Because this is a very complex problem. And so we have to anchor ourselves to empathy and impact to real individuals if we want to build momentum for change.
Yeah, we have a lot of work to do to break through that narrative. It is so strong, and people have been brainwashed in some way, and they're doing this humane washing and greenwashing. It's all marketing. They're sitting in boardrooms deciding exactly what images to put out there and what words to put out there to continue to have the public go along. It's hoodwinking, as you call it. So I know that you have been around the globe looking at animal welfare, and you've traveled globally and witnessed the variety of horrible ways in which animals suffer by human hands. When you compare and contrast countries, what stands out in your mind? Are we all pretty much the same, or what country is the most progressive with animal welfare, if any?
So, whether you are in China, Thailand, India, Mexico, Brazil, the United States, Canada, you will see factory farming as a cookie cutter model. You see contracted farmers who are in debt. You see animals that are kept wall to wall in overcrowded, filthy conditions, squalor and filth. And you see suffering animals, and you see the environmental impact of that, whether it be habitat destruction, pollution. And the system has been exported. It came from the United States and it has been exported around the world as a cheap production of protein. And as we've talked about on this podcast, all of the cost is being externalized. So the suffering is happening around the world, the impact on the environment, people, and the animals is happening around the world. So the system is, you could walk into a farm and I could take a picture and you would not know where I was. It could be anywhere. I think that where progress has been made is in Europe. Some progress has been made. Some countries have banned the worst practices. And the worst practices are cages and crates and some of the mutilations that are still all permissible in most places in the world. And so that's where progress is being made. But even there, it's being held up, it's being challenged. And so we have a lot to do globally. It's not enough to just stop factory farming in the United States, because then it'll happen somewhere else and we'll import the meat from there. And no matter where an animal is born or hatches, we have to defend them. We have to protect them because they all deserve a life worth living and they deserve to be protected.
Mm. So, speaking of that, protecting the laws that are supposed to protect the most innocent, we would think, in theory at least, laws for farm animals. In the book, you state there are no federal or state laws to protect chickens during breeding, hatching, transport, rearing, or slaughtering. The main laws intended to protect farm animals: the Humane Methods of Slaughter Act, the Animal Welfare Act, and the 28-hour laws. I don't know what that is. Specifically exclude chickens. So other animals are protected and chickens are excluded from these laws protections. Can you say a little more about that?
Yeah, 90% of all factory farmed animals are chickens raised for meat. So, not laying hens, chickens just raised for meat. And they are excluded from the basic laws that are protecting animals during slaughter and transport. So, the 28-hour law is regarding transport of animals and the maximum distance that they can be transported. And this is intentional. This is done so that companies can maximize profit with a disregard for the animal welfare. And the government allows it, it enables it. And so, one of the most important things we need to work toward is federal protection of farmed animals, in particular chickens. Fish are the same. Fish are in and I'm just, when I said 90%, I meant land animals. Fish are in the trillions, trillions. You think about small anchovies, you think of salmon, you think of trout. And the science is very clear. They are sentient, they are social, they are capable of joy and friendships and social connections. And they are also completely disregarded in terms of protection in the law. And this has to change because if we treated our companion animals, our dogs and our cats, the way we treat chickens and fish, we would go to jail and we would be ostracized in our communities. We would be condemned. And yet it is part of the agribusiness model for the way we treat chickens and fish.
Mm. And again, it goes back to speciesism, which is that invisible mindset underlying everything, that some animals are here for us to love and live with, and others are here for us to do what we wish with them, including commodify them and take their bodies. Um, so I have this sort of fantasy of a peaceful world where animals and humans live side by side in harmony, and I lean into that. But I know it's a fantasy; it's a dream that I won't see in my lifetime. I know that. But in your, you're in this day to day, boots to the ground. Your realistic version for the future. What does a more equitable and sustainable food system look like? And I don't know if you can support that with a couple facts.
Yeah, we need to transition the food system to a primarily plant-based food system. The math is very clear, first of all, on the environment. We are running out of arable land, and we are fast approaching our planetary boundaries, the boundaries that sustain us as a species. And factory farming contributes significantly to that. And if we don't resolve that, we as a species, well, it's game over. So, first and foremost, if we don't care about any ethics, we should, and we care about our own survival, we have to cut out factory farming. And so, moving toward a plant-based diet, and I understand not everyone is going to eat 100% plant-based. I do, my family does. We thrive, we're healthy. It's it's a choice for others, and I hope everyone would do it, but what we need to get to is where people are eating drastically less meat, dairy, and eggs. And I'm often presented, if you think about the problem as, what if we got 50% of the world to go vegan? Or is it easier to get everyone to eat half the amount of animal products?
Mm.
The result is the same, but the latter seems easier in terms of feasibility. So I try to be pragmatic, practical. The ask is for people to consider reduction, and if they can, elimination of animal products. But as a first step, get on the path. It's better for you, it's better for the planet, and of course, it's better for the animals, the workers, and the farmers. And so, a more equitable, a more compassionate food system is a plant based one. There's no doubt about that. Even the UN, they're recognizing this. Governments are recognizing this. We have to move toward a plant based food and farming system. We need solutions to help do that, like transformation, where we're helping farmers transition. And we need commitment from governments and we need commitment from companies. They need to help build the roadmap. They need to help build the bridge. And they're capable of doing it. Some of them are doing it already. We have companies adding plant-based options. We have counties like LA County, for example. LA County just committed to a vegan by default policy, meaning everything in LA County served by the LA County government is going to be vegan first, and you have to ask for the animal product. And we know from studies that that drastically reduces the overall consumption. And these are the kind of solutions we need. I'm very optimistic that faced with the climate change problems and the lack of progress that's been made, and the realization that we have to change our diet if we want to help reach our climate change targets, I'm optimistic from that sense. And I think after that comes the realization of how much this is better for a more compassionate world too. That when we embrace a plant-based diet, when we increase our plant-based consumption, we also are increasing compassion in the world and creating a more peaceful world.
Mm. Beautiful. I love that step by step sort of laying it out that way. Let's tie that a little further into activism. I'm an activist, and here at AAM, Animal Activism Mentorship, our mission is to support other activists to have them be more effective, give them resources and education and community and mentor new activists. So a large part of our audience are animal rights activists who participate in street activism and campaigns and outreach and education and more. So connect the dots between grassroots activism and the work you're doing, and how can we all work together more effectively for the animals? What, in your view, what are the strengths and weaknesses of the animal liberation movement?
So the studies are really clear that people are most impacted by people in their own social network in terms of the choices they make and the behaviors that they exhibit. And so activists, grassroots folks are so critical because you can have real impact on your social network. And you might be part of a church, you might be part of a yoga community, you might be part of a foster dog community. And by bringing your message into those communities, they're more likely to believe you, to listen to you, to try and ask for recipes and make changes, to sign a petition, to come to an event, than they would if Joaquin Phoenix told them to. Because Joaquin Phoenix is not like them. You are. And your impact on your community is critical. They're called social clusters. There's really clear data on this is how social change happens. It mostly on these really big changes, novel changes like your diet. They People change because of the people around them if they are changing too. And so what we want to do is create these ripple effects where you change the people around you, they then change the people around them, and so on and so forth until we've encompassed everybody. So I cannot I cannot overemphasize how important it is to be skilled at engaging people around you in this work. And
Mm.
there's a lot of great research on how to do that. Melanie Joy is a great person to look at how to talk about being vegan without turning people off or how to engage them. And one of the most important things is just get everybody on the path. Step by step. Somebody who is eating once a week or even one meal a week plant-based is a step in the right direction. And just keep nudging. The concept of nudging is better than people don't usually change on and off. They're not a light switch. They change by nudging. They change by being accustomed, by it becoming more of a socially acceptable change. So there's a lot we can do on the ground to nudge people toward this.
So, do you have any calls to action? I know that you say factory farming is too big a problem and too deeply entrenched to be dismantled by the animal protection movement alone. What are some calls to action? And we've sort of put those in the show notes, maybe where people who to email, who to call, anything.
Well, first of all, I encourage you to buy my book, and give it to as many people as you can. Because it has a lot of powerful stories that I think if people have been resisting learning about this issue, it's a way to engage people in a way that's not confrontational. So the holidays are coming up, birthdays, these are gifts that you can give people. And other books like that, I think, engaging people in films and having them just hear the stories from someone else is really, really powerful. I encourage you to share. We have a chooseveg.org website, which has a lot of information. A lot of times people just don't know how to start. They don't know what to eat. They don't know what recipes. And we have a lot of recipes and ways to engage folks. And we encourage you to share that website. I think having potlucks, bringing delicious food helps people change. And I would make it yourself a regular in your local representative's office and constantly bring up the subject around factory farming. What is your representative doing about factory farming? We have plenty on our website at Mercy for Animals, where regularly we're asking people to sign petitions. We're asking them to engage in various pieces of legislation that are coming up either at the state or at the federal level. And we need more voices. We need people to be engaging in a meaningful way on a regular basis in order to build power and change lives, change the way that farmed animals are treated.
So we're going to wrap up in a bit, but speaking of Mercy for Animals, remind me how long you've been president and CEO with Mercy for Animals. What is your mission and vision? Anything else that Mercy for Animals is up to currently, and how any other ways we can support or get involved?
Yeah, I'm the CEO of Mercy for Animals, and I've been doing it for 6 years now. But I've been working in this field for, like I said, almost 25 now, which I can't believe. And Mercy for Animals' mission is to end factory farming and end the exploitation of animals for food. And our vision is a world where animals are respected, protected, and free, that they're living out their days in the way we talked about Henrietta or Felix. And that's the world we're trying to build. We have a lot of initiatives. A lot of the work we do is around reducing the suffering of animals in the system. And this is where we're getting corporations to either ban cages or crates. And there's a lot you can do to get engaged. We have a program called Hens Heroes, and you can be part of that. And you can, when we have a petition going out to a corporation, you can sign it, you can get others to sign it. We are also actively working on getting companies and governments to add plant-based options and do this nudge effect where I talked about vegan by default. And we just had, like I said, LA County agreed to add plant-based options as a first offering. And we're doing more and more of that. And we're doing that not only at the local and state level, but we're bringing this to the UN. So we will be in New York end of September, and we will be looking at raising climate change and diet change as being interlinked at Climate Week in New York. And we also just opened up a Transfarmation hub in North Carolina. And this is a hub where a farmer has fully transitioned, and it's a prototype, it's a demonstration, a model of how a farmer changes, and it's open to anybody to visit and get their hands around, get blueprints for, understand the economics of, for farmers to be able to transition themselves. We have offices around the world, whether it be India, Brazil, Mexico. On the ground, we're doing tons of stuff to either change government, change corporations, and add plant-based policies to around the world.
Wow, that's a lot. So let's get involved. Let's do it. So we are going to wrap up. Any final words you want to leave us with? Any message of hope?
I'm grateful to the listeners, and I hope today inspires you to go tell stories and change people's hearts and minds.
Leah, you are just so authentic. Thank you so much for sharing your wisdom and inspiration. Thank you so much for all the work you're doing for animals. In case you ever wonder, you are leaving an invaluable legacy for these animals. I encourage everyone to read your book, Transfarmation, the Movement to Free Us from Factory Farming, available now through Beacon Press, wherever books are sold. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me. It was a pleasure.
Thank you all so much for listening. Please rate and review the podcast. It helps others find it more easily, and the more people that find it, the more people can be inspired by the guests interviewed on our show and turn that into actionable change for the animals. If you enjoy the Animal Liberation Hour and would like to support our work and animal activism mentorship, please consider joining our Patreon for as little as $2 a month if you're able to do so. This goes such a long way in helping us grow the animal rights movement through mentorship. Don't forget to follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube at Animal Activism Mentorship, where you can keep up with the podcast as well as everything AAM. One more reminder that you can sign up for a free mentor to help you with your activism at animalactivismmentorship.com. If you needed a sign that you should be an activist for animals, this is it. Remember that it will take all of us to achieve animal liberation. So stay focused, stay positive, be effective, and keep doing your part. Until next time, this is AAM signing off.